All right, guys, we are going to have so much fun. Today, we are talking with my good friend, Antonio Neves. Listen to this. Antonio is one of my favorite people on the planet, and his list of accomplishments is long. He is a best-selling author. He is a host of the Best Thing podcast, which if you're not listening to that, you need to be listening to it. It's incredible. He is an internationally recognized speaker and a wildly effective success coach. He's also an award-winning journalist. And get this, he has the distinction of being the only four-time guest to Dream Think Do. How about that? So that means that if we've been hanging out for a while, there's a very good chance that you know and love Antonio as well. So here's the thing. He also, you should know, he married totally out of his league, totally. And he'll be the first one to admit it. And he and his beautiful bride, Brigitte, have twins who are probably the cutest kids on the planet, and they threaten to break the internet every day. Anytime they post pictures of them, they're just that cute. Let's get to why we're talking today. As you guys know now, we are kicking off our year of launching 1 million dreams with Dreams Think Do. And so I had to have Antonio back because he perfectly timed his book launch. He's got a brand new book. We're going to be talking about it. The book is called Stop Living on Autopilot. The subtitle, get this, take note. It says, take responsibility of your life and rediscover a bolder, happier you. Who doesn't want that, right? So it is, I didn't tell Antonio we were doing this 1 million dream thing, but he just knew that this book needed to be there so that it could help support our efforts in this. So I can't wait. I'll tell you what, through the book, he gets us specific strategies to help us get clear, help us to launch those dreams, and really help to live a bolder and happier life. So we're going to be talking about that throughout this conversation. So let's get to it. Antonio, welcome back to Dream Think Do, brother.
It's good to be back for the fourth time.
For the fourth time. I had to go back and check. I'm like, good Lord, it seems like more than that, and it seems like less than that. So
I went back, Mitch, and saw that first photo from me from the first time I was on. I don't think I had any gray hair in my chin, but now I do.
You were looking good. There's no doubt. And Dream Think Doers, just so you know, you can go back and listen to that. I think it was episode 6. I mean, it was one of my very first episodes. And Antonio and I didn't know each other at all before that interview. We talked, we chit-chatted just a little bit before we hit record, had this amazing conversation. And then afterwards, I think we stayed on for an hour more.
Yep.
You know, it just kept that conversation going. Then we wound up being at a leadership conference, speaking at a leadership conference just a couple of months later, and just got to forge this brotherhood ever since. And I've mentioned it before, but I got to mention it now. I'm married, Antonio. Yeah. Or at least I facilitated his beautiful wedding.
Yeah, that was a great day. We appreciate you. We always think back. And just so the people know, we had the camera on backwards during the ceremony. So we thought we were recording my wife and I doing our vows and all that, but the camera actually recorded Mitch up close and personal the whole time.
Up my schnoz, if I remember right. Like you guys were going back in to watch this thing on your honeymoon, or just when you came back to say, oh, this beautiful camera set up at the best angle, and then to realize you were looking up my nostrils.
We're looking at Mitch. It was great, though. It's okay. It made us laugh.
I love it. I love it. All right. So, my gosh, man, seriously, congratulations on the book. It is incredible. And it is so perfectly timed. I think the world needs it. And I know as we're launching or helping to launch 1 million dreams this year, we need it. And it's all about stopping living on autopilot. So we're going to be talking about that in just a second. But here's the thing, man. You know the Dream Think Do tribe. I so appreciate your heart. And so I really wanted to bring you on specifically to talk about some things with this effort of launching 1 million dreams in a year, because what we're talking about is helping people, inspiring people, equipping people to say, all right, what's something that I want to do now? And I think you have a really unique vantage point on this, because I think for some people, it's easy to not give themselves permission to dream because they feel like they've had some success. Maybe they've achieved some of the things that they've wanted, but at the same time, maybe there's this gnawing that like something's not quite right. And I wanted to talk with you about, why should successful people, I want to start with that. Why should successful people, I'm going to put that in air quotes, but why should successful people also give themselves permission maybe to dream again or dream differently, dream of new things? Why do you think that is? I mean, especially based on some of your experiences.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the name of the book, Stop Living on Autopilot. But at some point, Mitch, we end up going through the motions. We end up on cruise control. We end up going with the flow. And the reason why that is because in many ways, society, it gives us these boxes to check off, right?
Yeah.
You go through high school, you get your education, you get a job. If you're fortunate enough to you meet an amazing person, you get married, you have kids, you get a home. I mean, we've all checked all these things off the list. And at some point after we check them off, we're quote unquote successful in life, but somehow we're flailing a little bit. We're asking ourselves, even though I did what society told me to do, something is off internally. And it makes me think about the coaching work that I do. And I'm sure you've experienced this as well, Mitch, especially as it relates to dreams.
Yeah.
I've coached so many executives, and these are amazing, talented men and women that have found their ways to titles like director, vice president, senior vice president, etc. And many of them have got to the place where they're struggling. And the reason why they're struggling is because many of the things that they were doing that got them to that title of director, VP, SVP, once they got in that chair, they made it to quote unquote success. Guess what? They stopped doing the things that got them there.
Yeah.
They stopped dreaming big. They stopped having aspirations because they thought they reached success. It makes me think about sports as well. We've all seen those games when there's a football team winning the game at halftime 35-0.
Right.
Then we know what happens. They come back after halftime and there's a whole different team on the field. Then it comes down to the fourth quarter. There's 2 minutes to go and they were up 35-0 at halftime. Now they're up by only 3 points.
Yep.
And they're hoping they can win the game because they stopped playing to win.
Yep.
They started playing not to lose. And that is such a different way to approach life. So in my experience, dreamers keep playing to win. And so just a great question we can ask ourselves is, what are some of those things that you stopped doing that got you to where you are today? Right. And what difference could it make if you reinstituted some of these things into your life as it relates to your career, as it relates to your relationship with your spouse? What did you used to do? Because remember that courting process?
you were trying to seal the deal, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
How much of that do you still do? Whether it be parenting, diet, fitness, etc. So we have to go back a little bit and ask ourselves, are we playing to win? Are we still putting ourselves out there? Are we still stretching? Or have we settled? And I think we know internally when we have settled.
Yep. And it's one of those, we don't like to admit it, right? But at the same time, you're like, okay, wait, what have I, what do they say? That a rut is just a grave with the ends kicked out, right? So it's that whole thing of being able to say, all right, you don't wake up in the morning and choose a rut. You don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, today is my day to settle. I cannot wait to get to my settling, but it does. It creeps in you. It creeps in on you. And that's one of the things I love about your book is you allow yourself to get real in this book. And I know that there's some stories in there where you're pretty raw about how you had personally achieved what everybody, at least in our industry, would say, oh my gosh, that guy's a success. But you were feeling completely different on the inside. You want to share a little of that?
Yeah. If you did a Google search of me in 2016, I was living my best life, man. I had it all figured out. I was a quote unquote internationally recognized speaker, had 3 successful self-published books, was speaking on stages at places like Google, had the background as an award-winning journalist, married, had the house, had the white fence, all these things. But inside, man, I was slowly wilting, like atrophy was setting in. It got to the point, Mitch, where a lot of people didn't know this, that I became a secret cigarette smoker. Like I wore this bright green gardening glove. I would hide in alleys. Now I'd smoke cigarettes. And the reason why I would smoke cigarettes with a green gardening glove on is because my wife, I was hiding the fact that I was smoking. That's my stress levels were that high.
Yeah.
One day, what I perceived to be a homeless man saw me in an alley smoking a cigarette. Those are always fun stories. Right. And he asked to bum a couple of cigarettes. Looked like he'd had better days. So I said, yeah, you can have some, of course. We're smoking together, talking like smokers do. And he asked me about the green gardening glove. And I said, my wife doesn't know that I smoke, so I'm wearing this so she can't smell it. He looked at me like I committed a crime. He looked at me with contempt and even like sadness, like he felt sorry for me. And he said,
Yeah.
hey, man, you got to figure that out. But the expletive is you got to
Oh
figure
yeah.
that out. And let me tell you something, Mitch, that guy telling me that stranger that I did not know, I think sometimes there are angels that show up in our life when we least expect them. But if you're open, that angel can be anyone. It can be that homeless man in an alley. It could be a driver in a ride sharing service. It could be that person you interact in the audience with just once. And that shifted my life in so many different ways, because what happened was I was no longer living intentionally. I was living by default. And I think another way to put this, Mitch, is that my manual had come to an end that I'd received, because all of a sudden here I am as a husband.
Yep.
But guess what? Between my mom and dad are 3 divorces apiece, 6 total divorces. Mitch, I didn't know what it meant to be a husband and see what a successful relationship looked like. I wasn't raised a lot by my father. He was my parents got divorced when I was 6 years old. So I was trying to figure out in real time what it meant to be a father to these kids. So in many ways, the manual wasn't there. So I was flailing. And so that led me to emotional eating. I gained nearly 30 pounds, grew a big beard to hide the weight. It didn't hide the weight, by the way.
But you could convince yourself it did, and it looked good, but just not as good as you're looking right now.
Exactly. The smoking came up. The 2 glasses of wine or more in the evenings, just so I wouldn't feel anymore. But again, encountering that guy made a really big difference. And you mentioned something earlier, and I'm a firm believer, Mitch, that a tombstone can have 3 dates on it. The date that we're born, the date that we give up, and the date that we die. For far too many people, and I was one of those people, I had reached a point where I was no longer trying. I was just scaling by, going with the flow. And I knew that if I kept in that direction, that the best thing to ever happen to me was going to be in my past as opposed to the future.
Yep. And I think that is so key. What I love though is that, you came to that realization, and a lot of people come to that realization and just bury. I mean, you talked about it, a couple of cups of glass, a glass of wine or whatever, a couple of nights a week or whatever, they start to bury, right? They start to cover up, they start to shut down even more. But you didn't, you started to wake up. And that's one of the other reasons why, for some people, a million dreams is, launching major life shifts. And for others, it's going to be just deciding to go and do something small, but significant. But it really does start with giving yourself permission to make some changes, right? To acknowledge some of those things and say, all right, what am I going to do? So let's dive into that for you. Because that's one of the beautiful things with the book too, is you really do lay out some great strategies. But let's talk about you specifically. When you were, here you were successful, right? But you were not feeling it. And I think that is an interesting season of that success, that anybody that's successful that's listening to this has probably experienced some of that, where success starts to become dangerous, where it's almost like that game you're talking about earlier, where you just start to play to protect what you've got as opposed to win the game, or you start to just maintain or, run that rut. You had to double down and recommit. So what were some of the things that you did for you that you had to start that process of making those changes?
Well, first and foremost, I had to recall that I wasn't the only one going through this. There are so many people that come up to me after speaking events, and Mitch, and say, hey, I'm not nearly as happy as I look on Facebook.
Yeah.
Or I'm not nearly as successful as I look on LinkedIn. I think sometimes when we're going through ruts like this, we kind of feel like, who am I to complain? Right. I've quote unquote made it. My complaints, my sadness doesn't have any merit. And I want people to know that's not the truth. People are there willing to support you, but we have to be willing to ask for that help. Yep. I needed to start dreaming again. But one of the key things I needed to do again for me is finding ways to be bold and courageous again. This is something we've talked about before, Mitch. The guy that moved to New York City in his early 20s with less than $1,000 in his bank account, with dreams and aspirations of breaking into the television industry, as a 40 something who had quote unquote made it, all of that had gone away. Again, I was playing not to lose. Those things that I used to do to be bold, those things that I would do to increase my heart rate, those things that I would do to give me butterflies in my stomach, I had stopped doing all of those things. You
Yeah.
know, we say a lot, we hear the refrain a lot, like, oh, I miss the old days. I miss the old days. What we really miss is the old us, who
Oof.
we were in those
Yep.
old days, how we showed up, the optimism, the vigor, that great attitude, etc. I really came to, I don't want to call it dark, but a realization, Mitch, that, you know, my dreams had an expiration date if I chose not to act on them.
Mm.
Like some windows weren't always going to stay open. So I tried to have fun with this in many ways, and I tried to gamify it. And
Yeah.
so you love movies, I like movies. A question I like to ask myself and even clients on a regular basis is, if your life was a movie and the movie was halfway over, what would the lead character start doing to turn things around?
Nice.
How about that? Because we all are the protagonist in our life, and we forget that we are writing the script of this life, that we have a say in our life. What happened to me for so long is I was pointing the finger outward, blaming everyone else, that very rarely would I point the finger at myself, because where I
Yeah.
stood at that point was based on the decisions I made or did not make in my life. And
Right.
that's a key one, or did not make, because we always
Yep.
think it's about, if you not making a decision is making a decision.
Yep.
So those are key things, gamifying it, some of questions like that about the movie. But also something that came in handy, Mitch, is I knew I couldn't do it alone.
Yeah.
And so I started reaching out, asking for help. I have no problem sharing with your audience that it was not too long after that, Mitch, you became my coach.
Yeah.
I joined some different groups, et cetera. I did not want to go about this all alone. I did not want to hide. So that's some of the directions that I took.
I love that. And I so appreciate you just being real about that, man. That is so good. But it's amazing that I think, you know, success can be dangerous, especially if it moves us to not allow ourselves to experiment and explore, right? Be bold and courageous, like you're talking about, but also so often success can lead, you know, people to be more and more isolated. And that is something, boy, when I look back to your life in 2016, 2017 and beyond, that was one of those significant shifts where I saw you engage and double down on relationships. We got to work together. I got to be your coach, which was one of the best coaching experiences of my life. And it's amazing how, boy, that hunger, you just went after it, right? And the book and so much of the fruit of what, you know, is happening now is a result of you making that commitment. And I love that. I love
And
that. What do you,
if I
yeah.
could just share briefly, but I think people may hear the words bold and courageous, and they think that means quitting their job tomorrow, or
Yes.
moving to Bali, or ending their relationship. No, that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Being bold and courageous for me, that meant having some tough conversations with my wife.
Yeah.
All those conversations that you can avoid every single day, seated next to each other on the couch while you're watching something else on Netflix.
Yeah.
That courageousness meant hitting publish sometimes on an email or a blog post, or on that, you know, that business opportunity, like literally hitting send on an email sometimes.
Yep.
So bold and courageous can look very different to different people.
Yep. I agree with you. And I think bold and courageous can start with those small changes. And then, you know, the fruit of that will be bigger things, but you have to start with the inside job. Right. And I think that's so good. I think actually one of the things, and you related in the book, you share the story in the book. But I mean, I got to be at least walking alongside you. I got a front row seat on you just deciding it was the simplest of things. But when you started to talk about it, I'm like, you're right. That is that's what we all aspire to, is the power of your uniform. And I want to talk about this. Like, you started to give yourself permission to be more yourself. And one of the immediate fruits of that was deciding on a different uniform. Let's talk through that, because I think, you know, again, like you said, sometimes when people think dreaming big or bold and courageous, it means major changes and, you know, quitting your job or whatever, moving around the world. But it starts with the smaller things. And I think this is a great example of this. So tell us more about what you're talking about is changing your uniform.
Yeah, well, first, for people who aren't watching this right now, if you see me right now doing this podcast interview with Mitch, I'm wearing a hat, a t-shirt, and like a jean jacket.
Yep.
Let's be clear. 3 years ago, you would have never seen me this casual before in a podcast interview or any capacity. But this is who I am. This is how I dress. This is how I feel comfortable. I grew up in a really blue collar existence in my small hometown in Michigan, and I grew up in apartments most of my life. But there was a man, or let's just say an archetype, if I will, that I saw on the other side of town growing up. And this other side of town was a nice side of town, Mitch. It was where they had 2-story homes and they had these things called garages, like they open up and cars can go into them. And they had like refrigerators in their garage, like a second refrigerator,
That's
that
right,
white
yeah.
refrigerator. And these men that live in this house with their wives and their kids, they had this uniform that I saw they wore. They were khakis, like those brown khakis.
Yep.
They wore like a white button-up shirt. They wore a blue blazer. Sometimes that blue blazer had some gold buttons on it.
Gotta have the gold buttons. Yeah.
But what about the anchor on the gold buttons every now and then, right? And they wore loafers with tassels on them.
Yes.
And so for me, when I saw that guy in life, I was like, oh, that's what success is. He has a job where he doesn't get his hands dirty like my dad. They sit at the dinner table every single night. They go on vacation. They do these family activities. So growing up, I thought that's what success was. I'll never forget the day that I got my first internship in Detroit, Michigan, and I was getting dressed for day one. And I put those clothes on, Mitch. I put on the khakis. I put on the white button up. I put on the blue blazer, which was like 3 sizes too big because it was my stepfather's.
Shoulder pads.
I put on the loafers and I went to look in the mirror and I was like, I made it. Tony Neves, you made it. And I looked at myself and I was like, this does not feel right.
Yeah.
I feel like a character in a B movie, in a bad B movie. But I wore some shape of that uniform for many years in my life, Mitch, because that's what I thought success was. That's what I thought it looked like. It even carried on until even after I left the corporate world and I became a speaker. You've seen me speak on stages. I wore the speaker uniform of the crisp jeans, the button up again, a nice slim fitting blazer and a nice pair of shoes. It wasn't until just a couple of years ago when I just really felt this overwhelming feeling like this is exhausting.
Yeah.
This is not me. This is not how I dress. This is not how I live in my real life. And I shifted to wearing jeans on stage and or slacks and a t-shirt and get this, even sneakers at times.
You rebel.
And the first time I did that, I freaked out. I thought the client would fire me. They're like, who is this guy? But I actually found something else happen, Mitch, when I showed up on that stage with jeans and a t-shirt and sneakers. If anything, Mitch, all of a sudden I had more credibility on that stage than ever before because I didn't look like anyone else in that audience.
Yeah.
I was more comfortable. It came across even in my speech. Like I was a reporter in television for a long time and I had that reporter voice. Welcome to the 9 o'clock news. By the way, no one who works in radio or the TV talks like that.
Right. They go home. They're not talking like that. Absolutely.
But I carried that voice to me on stages. Now I have a bit of a twang when I speak, right? And I swear every now and then, right? Those things come out. So all I'm trying to say is I had this uniform for so long. And for some people, that uniform can be the clothes that you wear. It could be the car that you drive, the neighborhood you live in, the views that you hold.
Yeah.
It could be maybe even institutions you go to that espouse certain views you no longer believe in. But something you carry with you, but sometimes based on your upbringing, you don't even think about anymore. But it can be weighing you down like a heavy backpack.
Totally. And what I love about that is that's the kind of deep awareness that people feel, but can't quite most people don't put their finger on. But once they have that awareness, then the epiphanies, it starts to crack open, right? And I love the clarifying that, for some people it is their clothes, but for other people it's other things. Like, what is that uniform that you've just accepted because of what you grew up with, what you were exposed to? And so I love that. And I love that, again, getting to have kind of a front row seat to walk in more freedom. It is amazing because you were a powerful speaker when you were, wearing the sports coat and nice jeans, but it's amazing how, as you gave yourself permission to be even more you, it just came across. And I know that everybody, whether you're a speaker or not, there's ways that we can do that where that true you comes out and it makes all the difference. And I think that's something that we all aspire to. Like, that's a dream in and of itself, to say this is the year where you get to be more you than ever, right? Like, that is an incredible dream.
Scary, Mitch, but it feels so good. And someone may say, well, Antonio, you wear a uniform now, right? The jeans but it's the one that I choose, right?
Right.
It's one that I've actually chose. And
that uniform might change. In 10 years, you might be doing a different type of uniform, but it will, like you said, you're choosing it as opposed to having being thrust on you, or just because it's what your dad did or what they did in your town or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
I love
Just
that.
briefly, I have to say for the individual who says, but Antonio, there's a dress code at the office. I have to dress a certain way. It's not about the clothes.
Yep.
It's about the awareness.
Yep.
It's about the mindset. You can wear the same thing you wear every single day at the office that you have to, and that's okay. But it's about the awareness.
Yep. That's so good. I love it. All right. So this has been so much gold, but let's bring it around and let's say, all right, let's say, and this may sound crazy, but that successful people listen to dream, think, do. And for some of them, for somebody that hasn't been a successful person, to say this next thing might sound crazy, but I think successful people like yourself will know what I'm talking about, that it's wild. But for successful people, often they are setting goals for their teams. They are setting goals for their organization. They are setting goals with and for their family, all of that. But for a lot of people that are listening and they're thinking about, all right, what are the dreams I'm going to go after this year? What do I want to do? When you start to set goals and dreams for yourself or get clear on those dreams for yourself, especially as a successful person, because maybe it's been a while since you've given yourself that permission, what's one more strategy to help them in that step of saying, that next step of saying, all right, what's that first thing that I want to do? What's that first step? What's that next step that I want to go after? What's one last piece of advice you'd want to offer that person, that especially that successful person they've been setting goals and going after dreams for their organization, for their family, for their teams for years, but maybe it's been a while since they've done it for themselves.
One of the biggest suggestions that I can make is, first and foremost, don't do it alone.
Yeah.
So I invite you, if you are having some challenges, dreaming, coming up with what's next as you envision your future, whether it's 3 months out, 6 months out, a year out, or more, I invite you either to invest in a coach. I invite you to invest in a group coaching program.
Yeah.
If that's not in the cards for you right now, there are some amazing books and resources out there available to help you do a quote unquote good job of designing your life. But also you can reach out to family and friends as well. Though funny enough, sometimes family and friends, people who are close to you, they may not be the perfect ones to do this with. You may have to go with someone you kind of know at church or something like that, because they can ask you some honest questions. One thing I've been doing a lot of, Mitch, as I think about the goals for the year, is I've been breaking my goals down into habits. So I'll look at the goal, but I'll break it down into a habit. So, okay, the person that wants to write a book, if my goal is to write a book, what kind of person does that? The kind of person that writes a book writes for 30 minutes a day.
Mm-hmm.
So it breaks down to what that activity is on a daily basis. Okay, you know what? Yes, it's easy for me to say I want to lose 45 pounds by the end of 2021. For me, as someone how I know myself, that's a little bit overwhelming.
Right.
So what I will do is say, you know what? I'm going to work out for 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week.
Yep.
That's something that's practical, that's tangible, that I can check off of the list. One of my goals for this year is deepening relationships. Some of my relationships in the past year got closer. Some got a little bit further based on distance, not seeing people, etc.
Yeah.
So for me, I know there's something on my list every single day. There's a word that's called connect. And that means I have to touch base with someone, but I actually have to hear their voice.
I love it.
It can't be a text. It can't be an email. And it can be as little as 5 minutes. I'm not saying that's to be an hour-long conversation, but I know on a daily basis, I have to do that. And so again, I invite you, as you think about that goal, whether it is to be a better husband, whether it's to publish a novel or a screenplay, whether it's to start your own business, etc. What does that look like as a daily activity? And most importantly, make it manageable. Because I think when sometimes people have these big goals, when they break them down, they say, I want to write this book, so I'm going to write all day long. And I'm like, no, you're not going to write all day long. Take some pressure off of yourself and say you're going to write for 20 minutes a day, and then eat into it. You'll see what happens. So for me, that's one of the best things you can do is, what will a person that wants to do this, what will their day-to-day look like? And that's from saving money, planning for that big trip to Tahiti, or something like that, and beyond.
That is gold. And what I love about that, I can say this to you, Tony, but to the dream think doers, what's beautiful about, Antonio saying that is I saw him do it specifically with this book. Like, I don't know if you remember this, dude, but when we had, I got to be in LA and we got a day together, we were at a meeting together, and it was a pretty early start to the day, but you would change your schedule around because you were working this habit of writing, right? Like you didn't have, I don't know that deadlines were set yet, but you were working that writing muscle. And it was beautiful. Even though we started early, you'd already spent, I think it was a half hour, 45 minutes writing that morning, getting stuff done before you came to the hotel and before we took off and all that stuff. And I love that, one of the reasons why we're talking today is that it's truly the fruit of that specific behavior of saying, all right, if I do want to write a book, what habits do I need to have in place? And you walk that out, man. And that's why we're talking. And that's why this book is going to be a freaking bestseller. It's going to go around the world and change people's lives. So
that's my hope. And just Mitch, briefly, what I want to say is you really illuminate something that I talk a bit about in the book, but I didn't say directly there, is something that I lost in 2016. I think a lot of us lose at some points. We lose our standards and we lose our values. What are some non-negotiables in our life about how we choose to show up for what we say matters most? Yeah. Our work, our products that we love, our family, our friends. And I didn't have those standards and I didn't have those values. And so nowadays, it's easy for me to get up at 4:45 a.m. on certain days to do activities before my kids get up at 6 or 6:30, because there are different values and standards I have in place that I know if that doesn't happen, my day's not going to go as it can plan, or certain things aren't going to happen. Like there are certain things nowadays that are non-negotiable. I don't fight with myself the night before about it. It's non-negotiable. You're getting up.
Yep.
Now, to be clear, I'm not waking up every day at 4:45.
Right.
But I'd lost some standards and values about how I want to show up as a human being on this planet.
I love it. All right, guys. I told you, if you didn't already know Antonio, you're already loving him, I'm sure. The book is called Stop Living on Autopilot. Subtitle again, Take Responsibility for Your Life and Rediscover a Bolder, Happier You. Trust me, as you read this, it will help you to do that. It's going to be one of the books I think that will truly help us to launch a million dreams this year. And brother, I so appreciate not only the wisdom that you share, but how you've been walking this out for the last few years. And I really do believe this book is the fruit of you living this message and proven that it works. So thanks so much for sharing what you do, and bringing the gold and being generous.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so happy that Mitch Matthews shows up in this book as well.
That's true. I'm in there. So get the book for that. All right. Love you, brother. Thanks, man.
Love you, man.